Itt vagyunk a magyar-ukrán.
We are here at the Hungarian-Ukrainian border crossing station at Beregsurány, and buses are in front of us. Buses from several towns and refugees are coming here. We are here because of the Transcarpathian Hungarians.
Miatt vagyunk itt. Jó napot kívánok!
Good day. I am László Toroczkai, mayor of Ásotthalom. We came here to help take people to Beregsurány. That's right. That's why we came.
Így van, Beregsurányban. Azért jöttünk. Szeretettel köszöntök mindenkit itt.
Welcome everyone. I am here on the Hungarian-Ukrainian border at the Beregsurány border crossing station. We came here because from the first day of the war we have been organizing. Our homeland movement and our partner organization, the Hungarian Self-Defense Movement, to help transport our Hungarian compatriots in Transcarpathia. We've seen from the first moments on that it is a great help to families, especially to women and children who pass on by foot without cars.
Segítsünk abban, hogy fuvarozzuk őket, szállítsuk őket.
Incidentally, if we're talking about this war that's going on here at our neighbors, let's look behind the scenes. Let's see what this war is really about. Let's talk about it the way they won't talk in any media outlet right now. After all, the Western media also carries out war propaganda, and of course, the Russian media also carries out war propaganda. So let's see what the truth is. What's behind the war in Ukraine?
Az ukrajnai háború mögött. Nos, mindenek előtt egy iszonyú nagy átverés.
Above all, this war is an awful big scam. People are being misled now as much as they were regarding the coronavirus. It all started with the fact that, a little over 30 years ago, the Soviet Union, together with the communist bloc in Eastern Europe, fell apart. It seemed that the opportunity arose to create a unipolar world order to replace the bipolar world order.
Az egypólusú világrend kialakítására. Ahhoz, hogy Putyin jelenleg...
To understand Putin's current policy, we need to know that, according to the prevailing Russian view, Ukraine and Russia are one nation, and an independent Ukraine has no right to exist. And there is undoubtedly something true in this, as today's Russia was actually created from the historical Kievan Rus. It is a continuation of it. The name Russia itself comes from the name of the Kievan Rus. The name of Ukraine actually means borderland. In the Middle Ages and early modern times, the Ukrainians were called Little Russians, and Ukrainian statehood was first born in 1922 in the Soviet Union. Ukraine, created in the 20th century, was formed from Polish, Romanian, and Hungarian territories in addition to the former Russian Empire. The Crimea, which has retained its status as an autonomous republic, belonged to Russia and became part of the Ukrainian Soviet Socialist Republic only in 1954 as an arbitrary personal gift from Nikita Khrushchev.
Személyes ajándékaként. The
next important date is 1991, when an independent Ukraine was proclaimed on the ruins of a crumbling Soviet Union. The Crimea had already caused minor conflicts between Russia and Ukraine, and a referendum was held in Transcarpathia on December 1, 1991, where the vast majority of those living in this region voted for an autonomous status as a form of self-determination. But this legitimate referendum, still legally binding, has not been enforced by any of the successive Kievan administrations.
A mai napig nem érvényesítették. 1994-ben írták aztán alá.
The Budapest Memorandum was signed in 1994 to guarantee Ukraine's territorial integrity in return for Ukraine's accession to the Non-Proliferation Treaty, resulting in the disarmament of the world's third largest nuclear arsenal in Ukraine between 1994 and 1996.
A harmadik legnagyobbnak számító nukleáris fegyver arzenáját. És el is érkeztünk a
And we have already arrived at the historical turning point, the so-called Maidan Uprising. In November 2013, protests erupted in Maidan Square in Kiev because Ukrainian President Viktor Yanukovych did not sign an association agreement with the European Union. The protests soon culminated in bloody incidents after police snipers fired at protesters and killed dozens of them.
lőttek, és több tucatot megöltek közülük.
This marked the beginning of several armed battles resulting in numerous casualties.
Végül 2014-ben
Finally, in 2014, Yanukovych fled to Russia. According to Yanukovych and Moscow, all of this was a coup d'etat, a coup backed by foreign forces. Although it is clear that a significant portion of Ukraine's population supported the protests, insurgent Ukrainian squads, who also killed police during the Maidan Uprising, also attacked pro-Russian civilians, just like clashes in Odessa, for example, which resulted in 48 civilian casualties. According to some opinions, an anti-Russian pogrom took place. And was there any foreign participation in the Maidan Uprising? International organizations, the embassies of the EU, the US, and Canada explicitly supported the Maidan Uprising. And, as we read in the journal of the Hungarian Jewish Cultural Association, called Szombat, one of the squads of the insurgents in Kiev consisted of former Israeli soldiers. One of the key Ukrainian organizations of the Maidan Uprising, the Right Sector, linked to the Odessa massacre and multiple acts of terrorism and murder, carried out an armed attack on a member of parliament and police officers in Munkacs, Transcarpathia. Despite this, it is praised and supported by Western, rather predominantly globalist circles. The leader of the Right Sector was previously on Interpol's wanted list, but since 2016, his name no longer appears on Interpol's website. In fact, Dmitry Yaros even became a member of parliament, and he was appointed an advisor to the commander-in-chief of the Ukrainian Armed Forces last November.
főparancsnokának tanácsadójává. Sőt,
Moreover, the Right Sector, despite committing acts of terrorism, has neither been banned nor designated as a terrorist organization. It is even allowed to maintain a Facebook page, while both incumbent US President Donald Trump and I were banned and our accounts deleted.
megjegyeznünk, hogy az orosz barát
At the same time, it is important to note that pro-Russian Viktor Yanukovych maintained a system which was corrupt to the core and used all possible methods of oppressing opposition politicians. At the same time, the ensuing pro-Western Ukrainian political system, government and president have built the exact same corrupt system.
korrupt rendszert épített ki. A Majdan felkelést, vagy
Following the Maidan Uprising, or from another perspective, a coup d'etat, Russia annexed Crimea in 2014. Shortly thereafter, a pro-Russian armed uprising, actively supported by Moscow, began in Donbas, eastern Ukraine, specifically in the so-called Donetsk-Luhansk regions, where intense fighting has continued almost without interruption ever since.
Nos, ez a látható politikai...
Well, this is the visible political antecedent of the Russian invasion that began on February 24, 2022. But let's look at what is less visible. What would they rather hide from us? And what is wartime disinformation?
Az a háborús dezinformáció. Az elmúlt években az
In recent years, the United States has begun intensively arming Ukraine, and the new Ukrainian president, Volodymyr Zelensky, has made it clear that he will not give up Crimea or Donbas. Moreover, just before the Russian invasion was launched on February 22nd, Zelensky had already announced that they would not comply with the Budapest Memorandum, which could even mean that Ukraine would become a nuclear power again.
atomhatalommá válna. És ezzel el is ér.
And this brings us to the most important issue of the whole war in Ukraine. Putin argues that if Russia does not act, Ukraine will sooner or later attack Russia to reclaim Crimea, and with Ukraine's accession to the EU and NATO, the buffer zone between the two poles of the world will be eliminated, and NATO missiles could be set up facing Moscow, only 500 kilometers from the Russian capital, near the Ukrainian-Russian border.
Határ közeléből meredhetnének NATO rakéták Moszkvára.
Were these Russian concerns justified? Although there are signs of this, we do not exactly know. One thing is clear. In recent years, the power brokers have done everything possible to worsen Ukrainian-Russian relations.
Orosz viszony. És hogy kik mozgatják a szálakat?
And who's pulling the strings? Who wants such a centralized, unipolar New World Order? I've already explained in numerous videos the ambitions of the World Economic Forum, which influences much of global politics. Announced in the first half of 2020 regarding the New World Order, which they referred to as the Great Reset.
Az új világrenddel kapcsolatban, illetve amit ők nagy újraindításnak, Great Resetnek neveztek el.
My video titled Coronavirus and the New World Order was made in 2020. Then in 2021, I created another video called Is the New World Order Controlled Single-Handedly? Followed by The New World Order is being built in the shadow of the coronavirus. And also, I introduce you to the rulers of the new COVID world order. I recommend that all of you who haven't watched these yet, look at them to better understand what the World Economic Forum truly represents, and who the people behind it are, and which global corporations, numbering in the thousands, are effectively aligning their interests behind the WEF. At the annual Davos World Summit, in addition to 1,000 global corporations that steer the world economy, 1,000 political leaders from around the globe gather to negotiate behind closed doors. 3 Hungarian companies coordinate their economic interests and influence price formation. We would call it a cartel, and it would be considered a crime. Yet, no one dares to label the World Economic Forum as a cartel. In several of my videos, I have already uncovered how the global corporations behind the World Economic Forum, led by Bill Gates, are connected to the coronavirus and vaccines. Now let's examine the relationship between the World Economic Forum and the war in Ukraine. Over the past 2 years, the World Economic Forum has consistently issued statements about the coronavirus and vaccines, with little else being featured on the organization's website. However, this is now a thing of the past. If we open their pages now, we will see the Ukrainian flag flying, and the message from the World Economic Forum is clear. Full support for the Ukrainian people, the suffering, innocent Ukrainian people.
A világot uraló milliárdosok.
The billionaires who rule the world are lying again when they claim they only want to help the people. Because, as I have mentioned earlier, America, NATO, and in fact, using the words of the failed or overthrown American President Donald Trump, the deep state, have been intensively arming Ukraine in recent years.
Vagy magyarul háttérhatalom intenzíven elkezdte felfegyverezni Ukrajnát. Nézzük meg akkor.
Let's take a closer look at who the true beneficiaries of this armament are, who the real winners of this war are, as in any war.
Ezen a háborún és egyébként minden más háborún is. Nézzük meg ehhez a
Let's examine the list of the world's largest arms manufacturers. According to a recent survey by the Stockholm International Peace Research Institute, U.S. companies are the world's largest contract arms manufacturers, ranked by military revenue.
hadipari bevételek alapján rangsorolja a cégeket.
This is a nearly $400 billion industry based on revenues from the top 100 manufacturers, and it has been steadily growing for 3 years.
Tart a növekedés.
Looking at the list of the world's largest arms manufacturers, the top spot goes to an American company called Lockheed Martin. Their revenue is nearly double that of the runner-up, and many times more than the others.
Sokszorosa az utána következőknek. Kimondhatjuk, hogy a Lockheed...
We can say that Lockheed Martin is the biggest beneficiary of the wars. Now let's see if we can find this company among the global corporations behind the World Economic Forum.
Nagyvállalatok között. Igen.
Yes, Lockheed Martin is on the list. By the way, the company in second place, Boeing, is also an American multinational corporation. And, of course, Boeing is also one of the global corporations behind the World Economic Forum, which advocates for a new world order. Now, let's look at whether the top 10 and most valuable Russian giants are among the companies behind the World Economic Forum.
Gazdasági fórum mögött álló cégek között. Nos, sem a Gazprom, sem a...
Well, neither Gazprom, nor Sberbank, nor Rosneft, nor Novatek, nor Lukoil, nor United Heavy Machinery, nor Nornickel, nor Polyus, nor Surgutneft nor Novolipetsk Steel are to be found among the major companies backing the World Economic Forum. This helps us understand why Russia was excluded from the global COVID business, even though Putin requested a larger share of the pie. The Sputnik vaccine was also not accepted in most countries.
Országban a Sputnik vakcina használatát sem.
Moscow is one of the main obstacles to a unipolar world order, so Russia, the nuclear power with the largest nuclear arsenal, has not been dealt a card in this game. Putin is not a saint either. He was simply pushed out of this business. In recent years, however, bypassing the news reports, a company that is very important for understanding the real causes of the war in Ukraine has become included among the large companies of the World Economic Forum. This company is none other than Naftogaz Ukraine, the world's largest state-owned company in Ukraine. In 2004, Naftogaz accounted for about 13% of Ukraine's gross national product. The company is involved in the extraction of natural gas and crude oil in Ukraine. Ukraine is a very resource-rich country with about 20,000 mineral deposits and a significant oil and gas reserve, holding the third largest reserves in Europe. This war is also about acquiring these resources. There's also something else, which even Hungary's left liberal or globalist news site, 24.hu, unable to be accused of pro-Russian or Putinist disinformation, has reported on. The Russian Ministry of Defense has released documents from the Ukrainian Ministry of Health. These documents confirm that several secret biological laboratories were operating in Ukraine, where the development of components for biological weapons took place. Major General Igor Konashenkov stated that the biological program was funded by the Pentagon. The general accused Ukraine and the United States of violating the UN Convention on the Prohibition of Biological and Toxic Weapons. In recent years, Moscow has repeatedly accused Washington of operating clandestine biological laboratories for unclear purposes in the former Soviet republics. A few days after the announcement, the Americans began to deny operating biolabs in Ukraine. After understanding the driving forces behind the war, let's now take a look at the leaders of Ukraine and Russia, Volodymyr Zelensky and of course Vladimir Putin.
Az oroszok vezetőjére, Vladimir Putyinra. Zajlik a háborús propaganda.
War propaganda and misinformation are actively spreading. As part of this, the globalist media and its Hungarian subsidiaries have turned Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky into a hero. However, Zelensky is actually an actor and comedian who first portrayed the Ukrainian president in a TV series. Born in the Kryvyi Rih in 1978 into a Jewish family, he became president of Ukraine in 2019, almost out of nowhere. He had only been involved in politics for a year, with no mass movement supporting him. The heroic myth the globalist media is currently constructing becomes overshadowed by the fact that we've recently seen him in these roles.
Hogy nemrég még ilyen szerepekben láthattuk.
Будьмо гей за волю, за долю, за правду. Будьмо гей по першій, по другій, по третій.
De jellemző az is, hogy miközben a globalista média hős...
It's also typical that while the globalist media celebrated him as a hero for holding a press conference in a bunker, where he very bravely sent a message to Putin demanding that he negotiate with him, that he do so not at the usual long table where he typically negotiates with others. While Zelensky might have been so drunk that he should have been seated on a chair next to the pulpit, I'll let you all decide how reliable he appears to be. The media, of course, carefully omitted these images from their reports.
Мы себя хотим защищать. Ну вот, а они хотят просто разбить это.
Вы готовы гарантии какие-то даты, чтобы...
Гарантии для чего? Мы не нападаем на Россию, не собираемся на нее нападать. Гарантии что? Мы в НАТО? Нет. У нас есть ядерное оружие? Нет. Что я должен сказать? Кому я должен что-то дать?
Miközben Zelenszkijből éppen hőst farag a média,
While the media creates a hero out of Zelensky, they portray Putin as a dictator gone mad, intent on destroying all of Europe and even humanity. But just take a look at these maps and decide whether this is a chaotic war or a very well thought out strategy.
Jól átgondolt stratégiát valósítanak meg. Ezen az első térképen azt látják,
This map shows the directions from which the Russian army has attacked Ukraine, and the areas marked in red that are already under its control. Now look at this map. It shows the geographical line that divides Ukraine into two, with the Dnieper River running as close as 10 kilometers in some parts at the center.
elérő Dnieper folyóval. Aztán nézzenek rá.
Next, examine this map, which highlights areas with a high percentage of Russian speakers marked in blue.
Oroszul beszélők aránya.
Finally, look at this map showing Ukraine's oil and gas fields. From these, you'll see that the Russian military is advancing according to a perfectly planned strategy.
orosz hadsereg egy tökéletesen átgondolt terv szerint nyomul előre. És mi lesz a vége ennek az egész?
What will be the end of this Ukrainian war? Putin knew exactly that sanctions were coming, but he struck an anticipatory agreement with China, a two-faced player. While he supports China in reclaiming Taiwan, China has not been excluded from the unipolar world order like Russia. Even in the World Economic Forum, there are Chinese companies, such as Alibaba Group. However, American hegemony doesn't sit well with China either. Putin knew he would likely lose Western European gas contracts over time, with Germany suffering the most, but he doesn't care. He increased gas supplies to China and struck deals with Pakistan and India, ensuring he could recoup some of his lost European revenues from those markets.
Onnan fogja a jövőben pótolni. Ennek a
The real loser in this war will be Europe. They are now completing what they started with the First World War. The goal has long been to prevent exactly what our homeland movement already stated in its founding statement. From the very beginning, we have been speaking about Northern civilization because the division of Europe only benefits its enemies. Northern civilization stretches from Kamchatka to the Japanese cultural sphere to the Celtic cultural sphere. This is a single civilization, one that we Hungarians understand best. We embody both Eastern and Western heritage of this civilization, which is fused within us. If this civilization could unite, if it had not been divided into Eastern and Western parts for centuries, it would be the most powerful force in the world, and we would all live much better lives. If German capital merged with Russia's vast lands, raw material reserves, and human resources, it would create an immense power capable of pushing back the deep state forces rooted in America, which currently dominate the world. Incidentally, they don't even try to hide this themselves. Just listen to what George Friedman, the founder of Stratfor, often called the shadow CIA, said years ago.
Germany is in a very peculiar position. Its former Chancellor Gerhard Schroeder is on the board of Gazprom. They have a very complex relationship to the Russians. The Germans themselves don't know what to do. They must export. The Russians can't take up the export. On the other hand, if they lose the free trade zone, they need to build something different. For the United States, the primordial fear is Russian capital, Russian technology, German technology and German capital, Russian natural resources, Russian manpower, as the only combination that has for centuries scared the hell out of the United States. So how does this play out? Well, the U.S. has already put its cards on the table. It is the line from the Baltics to the Black Sea.
Végül pedig mi a magyar érdek? Hát mindenek előtt
Finally, what is in Hungary's best interest? Above all, Hungary must stay out of this war, not only by refusing to send weapons or troops to Ukraine, but also by preventing NATO from using our territory for arms shipments, as this could drag us into the conflict.
Hiszen így is belesodorhatnak minket ebbe a háborúba.
No Hungarian should lose their life in Ukraine, and Hungarian blood should not be spilled to enrich the world's ruling parasitic elite.
Azért, hogy a világ disznófejű urainak a zsebeit tömjük meg.
Avoiding involvement in both the military and economic aspects of the war will not be easy, as war propaganda will remain relentless and may even intensify. Graphic images and videos of murdered civilians, especially women and children, will be widely circulated to manipulate emotions from both sides, fueling both Western globalist and Russian war narratives. A common attempt to draw Hungary into the conflict involves comparisons to 1956. Lyubov Nepap, Ukraine's ambassador to Budapest, has also used this parallel to push Hungary towards supporting Kiev. However, this comparison is deeply flawed. The most important counterargument is that in 1956, the Soviet Union, not Russia, attacked Hungary. This means that many of the soldiers in the tanks sent against Budapest were likely Ukrainians themselves. Furthermore, an official Russian military manual, distributed to every Russian soldier, reportedly captured by Ukrainian military intelligence and considered credible, includes the following statement as part of the Russian soldiers' orders. The Russian army is the last bastion against Satan's New World Order.
A sátáni új világrend ellen. Mi magyarok pedig arról sem feledkezhetünk meg, hogy
We Hungarians must never forget that the current regime in Kiev has consistently acted against the Hungarian community in Transcarpathia in recent years. A year ago, President Zelensky signed a decree banning Transcarpathians with dual citizenship from holding any office in Ukraine. Furthermore, Ukraine's national security services have since placed Hungarians in Transcarpathia under increased scrutiny, placing them on lists, leading to even harsher discrimination in the region.
a térségben. De pillancsunk csak bele az...
To understand the extent of these actions, let's look at Uzhhorod Television's 2019 documentary, which highlights numerous cases of incitement and attacks against Hungarians.
Diszkriminációról, uszításokról.
Between 2014 and 2018, human rights observers documented 426 anti-Hungarian incidents in Ukraine. On November 12th, masked anti-Hungarian Ukrainian chauvinist protesters stormed a mayor's office in Beregszás, throwing flashbangs and smoke grenades before removing the Hungarian national flag in front of the city hall. On February 2nd, 2018, unknown assailants threw a highly flammable, incendiary device into the headquarters of the Hungarian Cultural Association in downtown Uzhhorod, Transcarpathia. February 27, unknown perpetrators blew up the office of the Hungarian Cultural Association in Uzhhorod, Transcarpathia. The explosion completely burned down the lower level of the building. This was clearly a terrorist attack, since a bomb was clearly detonated, and had anyone been inside, their lives would have been in danger.
Mi tehát a magyar érdek?
So what is the Hungarian interest? We must not allow Hungarian soldiers or weapons to be sent into this war, nor will we allow NATO to use the territory of Hungary as a staging area or base of operations, thus making the Hungarians a target in this war.
Téve a magyarokat ebben a háborúban. Másodszor pedig...
Secondly, if the Russians and Ukrainians agree that the UN should decide on the future of Ukraine, on the borders of Ukraine, we must remind the UN of the outcome of the 1991 Transcarpathian referendum.
Népszavazás eredményére. Mindemellett pedig...
In addition, a Hungarian national economy must be built, which can bring Hungary partial self-sufficiency and sovereignty. This is the very essence of our Dawn program. And it is not good for the independent Hungarian national economy to have a unipolar world order, fully centralized financial power, just as it is not good if we have to buy expensive American shale gas instead of cheaper gas from Russia.
Érkezik majd ide. Magyarországnak tehát...
Hungary must therefore fight against economic sanctions that cause enormous damage to Hungarians and to the whole of Europe.
Gazdasági szankciók ellen is.